it's not uncommon to see multiple markets exit scam, which is something to definitely be aware of. But it's especially true when they're under significant pressure, like we're seeing with these DDoS attacks. So it could be from cyber attacks or from law enforcement scrutiny. These are usually the times when, if they're going to leave, they do. What's up, everyone? I hope you're doing well today. I hope you're doing better than a lot of the darknet markets are doing right now, because they're getting hammered. There's massive DDoS attacks that are taking place that are definitely affecting the usability of pretty much a lot of the major markets that are out there. We're not really seeing the smaller markets get hit, which is good for them. Before we get into talking about Archetyp and the response to the market, for the sake of honest dialogue, I wanted to discuss a little bit my background with this specific market, Archetyp, which previously sponsored a scavenger hunt, which I ended up reviewing in detail and calling it out. I basically showed that mathematically it was an impossible challenge for literally anyone to win on a statistical level. And the admin's response was, we'll say, less than rational, leading to a month-long tantrum on Dread. And he had made a post about me, which then I turned around and basically dismantled point by point, forced feeding his words back to him. And in the process, I think, kind of showing a bunch of different logical fallacies and deflections, and in some cases just outright lies, using his own words against him. Now, after that, all he could really do was do things like cast insults, like call me gay, which for the record, I'm not, that I'm fat, and I'm definitely not here to pretend that I'm perfect. I can absolutely stand to lose weight, eat a salad every once in a while, or get on a treadmill. But that's something that I can change anytime I really want to. Meanwhile, things like overcoming narcissism and being a pathological liar are far more challenging. And kind of in that sense, I feel fortunate. Unsurprisingly, this saga has definitely earned me a few haters on Dread, but that's just kind of the nature of the community. There's always going to be diehard defenders of markets. For example, vendors are absolutely dependent on markets for a living, and buyers for what buyers are there for, right? And there are definitely true believers who will justify virtually anything. Even during an exit scam, they'll still insist that the admins are like just doing maintenance and they'll be right back. And with that, it can turn into like a cult-like following. Now, these defenders usually end up disappointed, ironically enough, because as anyone actually familiar with the scene knows, markets rarely end well. I mean, we've all seen this before. How many times have markets gone from being trusted to being gone overnight? The backstory is fairly important, and that's just why I wanted to really cover it real quick. I didn't really want to have to repeat myself because I know people are going to be like, oh, why are you talking about Archetyp? I wanted to clarify why. Despite my issues with the actual admin, I still think that the market is great. And that's why I actually made a video about it originally with the first video that I made. As far as I can tell, no one's actually been ripped off, which absolutely matters to me. It's about community health, essentially. The market adds positivity to that, even if the market admin doesn't always. That said, how he's been handling the DDoS attacks is kind of how I was expecting him to handle the scavenger hunt issue, like a real CEO would. This is really refreshing to actually see, as it shows maturity that's developed on his part. These attacks have absolutely targeted things like the public access points, and specifically their public mirrors, which attackers often rely on or focus on because they're like low effort losers. It's just one of the main reasons that some markets, and even Dread at one point, had kind of like these pay or secret mirrors that only certain people actually had access to. And the result's been basically intermittent outages from this DDoS attack and slow connections at best, making and accessing the marketplace challenging for many users. Now, we had thought this specific issue of things like DDoS attacks was pretty much all but dead. I mean, you never actually think that they're retired, but they slowed down considerably. We had a multi-year DDoS campaign, which at one point just all but killed Dread. For like 6 months, it was gone. Dread had pretty much died. I even made a video about this, and I made a video about this very thing. Then Hugbunter, to his credit, got to the point where he could actually keep the site online for most of the time. And then later, the Tor project actually came through and made an update, and I made a video on that too, which also discussed, is this the end of DDoSes? The market, meaning Archetyp, had just hit a major milestone, surpassing 500,000 registered users and climbing to 515,000 right after that. And this is a huge, huge milestone. To try to put this into perspective, this is basically the population of the state of Vermont. Other well-known darknet markets have also reached those kind of same milestones, right? Like Dark Market, which was an actual darknet market, was shut down in January of 2021. It had reached almost that many, with almost 500,000 users. Not quite, but it was slowly working its way there. Now, White House Market, which operated until October of 2021, had almost double that at 895,000 registered users. And the very well-known Hydra Market, which was seized in April of 2022, had around 17 million customers, which out of those is definitely the undefeated champion. Now, hitting 500,000 is a fairly big deal. When I did the very first video on the market, mind you, that's the actual market, like not the market admin. I've done a few videos that relate to the market in general and to the admin, and I would put those in completely separate categories. One's focusing on the market while the other's focusing on an individual, and those are definitely separate things. But when I did the original video on the market, they had 343,287 people. And I think it really shows the market's popularity, if nothing else. However, this DDoS attack came on the heels of that very celebration, which sucks. It casts a shadow over the achievement and turn the focus on to keeping the platform accessible for everyone. Now, Big Boss, the admin of Archetyp, had been informing users of the situation via their subreddit. And the primary issue, because it's a DDoS attack, is people actually being able to connect to the site to begin with, and specifically connecting via the public mirrors. A major target for attackers, again, is those public mirrors because they're public. All markets have URLs that everyone can see. These are what I'm referring to when I say public mirrors. So the admin basically recommends a solution that involves users setting up a private mirror via their account settings. These private mirrors are much more resilient to things like ongoing attacks, providing a stable way for individuals to be able to access the market. The admin emphasized this repeatedly because given the way a DDoS actually works, more obscure and limited the access point, the harder it is for attackers to attack it and overwhelm it. It's kind of like a case of security by obscurity, where it's difficult to find, so it's difficult to attack, if that makes sense. So for those of you that don't have a private mirror set up, you're screwed. No, I'm just kidding. Big Boss basically suggested trying out usual public mirrors repeatedly until you actually get to a point where you can get to the site. And in order to do that, you might have to hit Control-Shift-L, which will essentially refresh your Tor circuit. Refreshing the Tor circuit actually works because it forces your connection to reroute through a new set of Tor relays. If the DDoS attack targets the particular nodes that you're using, or they're facing congestion, or changing the circuit can absolutely help basically get you to dodge the congestion and get a fresh path that might actually work better. It's kind of like the difference between walking on a sidewalk and walking through a jungle. The latter is going to be much more difficult to go through. So with the refreshing, you can kind of try different paths until you find one that actually works. Now, this has been a pretty effective workaround for many of the people who commented back, which was great because it actually enabled them to bypass some of the connection problems and in turn be able to create private mirrors, which made life a lot easier for them in the long run. Additionally, Archetyp's main site on the ClearNet, which I'll put up right here, has come back online with things like rotating mirrors to help users find alternate paths if the usual ones are actually down. And this will help because then at the end of the day, while the main mirrors are getting constantly bombarded, you have these rotating mirrors they have a better chance at being able to utilize in order to hop on the site and make your own private mirror. Now, as the most recent update, which is just 8 hours ago, which I realize in post-production is probably going to be a lot more, but a DDoS attack is still ongoing. And on Dread, they basically said that he's handling the situation as best he can. But honestly, it still feels a little bit hollow, like they're just kind of struggling and saying, we're doing what we can, we're going to keep trying. And it's definitely frustrating, especially for everyone that's trying to use the site and obviously the people trying to keep the site up. While frustrating, it's also understandable as it's been something that the community in general has had to put up with for a prolonged period of time. We're talking years. This is well before Archetyp even came along. So it's something that the community is kind of used to. But the good news is that refreshing connections, as per his or her instructions, have worked for the most part. And that stability is not something that's absolutely guaranteed. So this is obviously a major drawback. And it's one thing to get a hold of a site and have it connect, but it's a whole nother thing for you to actually be able to log in, get to the point where you're logged in, then you go somewhere and it times out multiple times. That can be super frustrating. But from what we've seen, the team is supposedly working on mitigating this impact and keeping the service available. But it feels kind of like, to me, that they're running out of options. That's just kind of the nature of the beast. Aside from the vague statement that they make, they really didn't give us any other details about how they're actually kind of countering it. And currently, all the mirrors are accessible. So how, I guess, it really doesn't matter. At the end of the day, people just want to be able to use the site. But with varying reliability, as the team scrambles to counter the constant attack, it's kind of a roll of the dice whether or not you'll be able to. Now, the methodology still stands of using public mirrors or rotating mirrors to be able to get onto your account to create those private mirrors. Now, I really like seeing the market's actual response when this kind of bad stuff actually happens. You can tell a lot about the market and people when it hits the fan. Unlike other markets, it's great to see them actually taking to third-party forums to actually update the community as a whole, which after all makes a lot of sense given the fact that the community is in fact the lifeblood of the market, right? Like without the community, you don't have a market. So the attack, though, really shows how much resilience you really have to have when you have a darknet market, even the world's biggest, in order to actually survive. And it's something that every market faces sooner or later. It's like constant pressure from all sides. Resilience against cyber attacks is absolutely mandatory for survival in that ecosphere. Given that these markets are frequently targeted for one reason or another, the DDoS attacks definitely show vulnerabilities that darknet marketplaces on a global level, all of them really end up having to face on a regular basis. And they have to adapt, super quick to be able to survive, like animals in the wild. And they have to do this for prolonged periods of time, most of the time. But I definitely think credit where it's due, right? They have been absolutely transparent with all the users, and I want that from all the markets. This is the type of honesty and sharing workarounds and clear instructions that have a level of openness to them that's absolutely vital to the community, and especially at times like now. But what do you think? Do you think they're handling this well? Do you think that there's anything that they could potentially improve on? What do you like about their response? While I might not actually respond to all of your responses. I do read them all. Heads up, one thing to be cautious of is when that kind of stuff stops, right? We all know that no market is forever, and this is just the sad reality of the nature of the business. All operate on a timetable before they even started. So some, in some cases, gracefully leave, which is to say they're the overwhelming minority, the ones that don't rob people. They basically give users the heads up that they're closing, while others get busted, or even still others, and I would say the majority, outright rob the actual community via exit scams. While the attackers have managed to cause some disruption, I would say that overall Archetyp's quick response and adaptability shows resistance, which boosts confidence in the actual market by the community. And I think that's a great thing. I really do. We touched on agorism in another video, but to add to that, like, I'm all for black markets and for bartering. I think that there's real power in counter economics. Now, during times like these, it's not uncommon to see multiple markets exit scam, which is something to definitely be aware of. But it's especially true when they're under significant pressure, like we're seeing with these DDoS attacks. So it could be from cyber attacks or from law enforcement scrutiny. These are usually the times when, if they're going to leave, they do. So, for example, in 2019, Wall Street Market basically exit scammed and stole 14 million in crypto from their own users. And similarly, in 2020, Empire Market also vanished, with administrators, they estimate, stealing around 30 million in Bitcoin. Now, these examples show what I would say is definitely a reoccurring pattern where markets opt to exit scam when the risk became too great or the workload became too high. This indicates how external pressure can absolutely lead to not only instability across the darknet ecosystem, but also volatility, in that they're just going to snatch the money and run. I mean, one thing we have to keep in mind, as much as we might like this market or that market, that at the end of the day, the people who run these markets don't really care if you like the market or not. They're in it to make money, and that's it. But at the same time, we expect them to act professionally and do things like the stuff we see Archetyp doing right now, which is updating people, giving them workarounds, and being clear and concise about it. For me, I think when markets are dealing with stuff like this, we could actually quantify the chance of an exit scam to be exponential on multiple levels. So be careful out there, everyone. You know, we all know how unpredictable things can actually get in that space. So stay sharp and keep your OPSEC tight. And as always, I'll see you in the next video.